All right, it's been a fun summer filming. Yes, the skin above my lip is still red. No, I don't know why. Yes, I'm seeing a doctor about it tomorrow. But it doesn't hurt, and you're here to hear about books anyways, so we're just gonna move on. We're gonna keep on trucking. And this is kind of a video I decided to put together because 2 weeks ago I posted my reactions to the New York Times Best 100 Books, which, like, everyone's just been reacting to it and having fun with it. But in my having fun with it, some people in my comments were like, I don't know, upset that I think literary fiction shouldn't be the only genre considered for best ofs, or thought I was looking down of it, probably because I just made some light jokes. But I like literary fiction. If you watch that video, I read 15 books off that list, and then the newer list, the New York Times made by the People's Choice, I've read 32 of those. I read general, historical, and lit fic that are fairly more popular leaning. I don't tend to find the hidden gems in that space, and it is by far not my most read genre, but I like it. I seek it out. Right now I'm working on a project where I'm purposely pushing my comfort zone in writing styles. I think literary fiction gets this acclaim in art that it's exhausting to me, because I do think it has value. Of course I think it has value. But I guess maybe my big unpopular opinion is I think pulpy genre fiction has equal value. And I know that's just me saying equal really would rub people the wrong way. But like, when I think of myself as a person learning about the human experience, some of my biggest lessons and my biggest takeaway were from genre fiction and from pulp and from camp. And that's not to say that I didn't gain stuff from literary fiction or or general fiction. It's just to say that, like, I don't get why people just assume that some art is inherently better than other art. It's just art. If it makes you emotional, if it makes you connect, if you resonate with the themes, it's good. Now, that to say, I did want to talk about 20 non-genre books that, on this list. So that does mean there'll be some speculative books. And when I'm saying genre books, it's just, there are certain tropes, trends, pacing, act structures you associate when you pick up a sci-fi fantasy book versus when you pick up something that's more literary or general fiction, because there is more experimentation, I feel, in the literary fiction space. Not to say that can't happen in the genre space, but this is like, these 20 books, it felt right to put them here if they were speculative and not on a genre list. And that's just wibbly wobbly, and I'm not the genre police, okay? So we're gonna go through this list. It's in no order other than I went through my Goodreads and I wrote them down. As I saw books, I was like, yeah, that's it. All right, so let's start with one that I talk about rereading all the time. And I think part of my issue is I want to reread it all the time, but I also want to keep reading more of this author's works. And is this technically my favorite by this author? I don't know, but it was my first, and I think that's why it has this impact. And that's La Rose by Louise Erdrich. I adore this book. And it's what made this author one of my favorite authors ever. Like, every time I pick up a work by her, and I've read 4 or 5 by now, I love them. I love them all. I think my least favorite is Future Home of the Living God, but that was still a 4-star book. So, I love this story. It's late 20th century, early 21st century, Northern America, but it's like on a residence and part of the United States. And we have a family that has people that live on the residence and live in the United States. And there's a hunting accident, and one of the children is killed. And so this other kid is kind of shared between the family. And like, this community is so alive. You get to watch all these people, the kids, the adults, these blended communities. And it also, like I said, takes place end 20th century, early 21st. So there's definitely 9/11 and like the eve of that situation in the United States and the conflicts that it throws us into. And I just love it. I say this all the time about Louise Erdrich, her ability to create communities that I'm instantly enraptured by. Like, I just love watching them. I love an ensemble cast, and Louise Erdrich writes an ensemble cast unlike anyone else I know. So I could have put probably, The Sentence or The Night Watchman or something here, but like, this is the one that made me love her. And it's been probably 6 or 7 years since I've read it, and I still think about it all the freaking time. The next one I have talked about recently because it was on the New York Times bestseller list, and that is Exit West. I love Exit West. This one, it's a world where doors show up, and you can walk through a door and you'll end up somewhere else. And governments are trying to control these doors, of course, because they don't want people just like showing up in their country, because God forbid we don't have strict, rigid borders. But that's like the whole point of the book, is it has 2 sides to it. The big question of, what do you do if there are no borders? What does that do to the political, refugee, just general climate of the earth? when people are not forced to stay in one place when it is no longer safe for them, and when people who don't want people to enter have no choice. What does that look like? It's not like it has like big grand answers. It's just like, here's our question, let's think about it. And specifically, you're watching over the course of 30 to 40 years how the world reacts to this through the eyes of these two people who meet in like a war-torn area in the Middle East area. The country's never named because it's not important. It's that classic litfic thing of just like the unnamed blah 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 because it represents so many other things. Which I don't like. I still love Exit West. I just like we make fun of tropes in pulp, I make fun of some tropes in litfic. But in Exit West, these two people, they meet each other, they form a strong bond, but you see how that bond is tested and changed through the years. I think it's a beautiful story. I really liked the writing. And I'm also just like a big person where I'm like, yes, I love looking and analyzing this theme in particular. All right, next up is Pachinko. This is probably the one that made me realize that I do really like generational family stories. And it was a story that, I mean, unfortunately, was my first insight into the 20th century history of Korea and Japan, other than what little we are taught about World War II. So, like, that's unfortunate, but it was also 6 years ago, and I've since gotten way better at reading nonfiction and things like that, so, like, I don't beat myself up about it too much. But in general, this story, though, I just found I couldn't put it down, and it's long. This book is like a 400 or 500 page historical fiction, and, like, that pushes it for me. Like, personally, I usually only read books that big if they are sci-fi or fantasy. But this one flowed so well for me. You really do go through almost the entire 20th century with this family. And I just really liked wallowing. Like, there is, like, pseudo a main character that you see throughout the generations more so than other people. But I liked learning things. But again, it's kind of like what I was saying with La Rose. It's like, I just like watching an ensemble cast. And I just thought the writing was great enough that I was immersed into their experiences, into their struggles, into their sometimes problematic love affairs, like that sort of thing. I was just very in it. This was the one that I thought should have been on the New York Times list instead of the one they posted, and that is In the Distance by Hernan Diaz. I don't think at the time I knew I liked this book as much as I did. And I think about rereading it because I do own it, because I read it before I used the library, and I had to buy the Kindle for my book club. And, like, this is like a reverse Western. We have these characters, and I forget what country they're from, but they're from Europe, and they're coming to the United States. And it's 1800s Gold Rush California era, and the brothers get separated on different ships, and they think it's going to just be fine. But one brother's going to New York, and one brother went to California. And again, it's the 1800s. You can't really, like, easily fix this mistake. And the entirety of the book is this one brother trying to cross back to the East Coast of the United States from the West Coast. So it's like kind of a reverse Western. And he doesn't speak English. Like I said, I forget what country they're from, but he does not speak English. And it's a melancholy story, and I really liked it. I don't know, I should reread it. This is one I definitely, like, I think like La Rose, I think about rereading a lot. But this is why I got excited about reading Trust, because I really trusted the author here, and I got very impressed because Trust is actually written in like 4 different writing styles, because it's like 4 different books in a book. And all of those were different from the writing style in this, so I'm just like, you are a very versatile author, and I've liked all the styles you've been playing with, so cool. But yeah, if that sounds at all interesting to you, it is, I'm not going to say it's like a happy story, but it's also not like the most depressing thing. But I don't know, like I said, it's like a subversive reverse Western situation. And since I'm also not a Western person, like, maybe that's part of the appeal for me. We have There, There. Oh, I love There, There. Again, it's an ensemble cast book. I also love ensemble cast TV, what can I say? This is 21st century. There's going to be a powwow, and we're following all these characters, and they are connected, but you don't really see, obviously, how they're connected. And we're leading up to this powwow, and I believe you know something bad is going to happen at the powwow. So it's about following these people, how they get to the powwow, and then also the after effects of what happens there. I still need to read the new Tommy Orange. I've loved Tommy Orange's other short story that I've gotten to read. Yeah, this one, again, it just flowed. And also, I think at the time, the only other Indigenous work I had read was La Rose, so it was nice reading another Indigenous work. It was nice learning about modern Indigenous cultures and, you know, how that works. And also, there was a lot of good commentary on, like, the urban Native American in the United States. The Great Alone. This is my basic bitch historical fiction answer. I mean, this is the only Kristen Hanna I've read. I don't know why, even though I loved this book so much, I haven't read more Kristen Hanna. This book, like, I just couldn't put it down. This takes place in the 70s in the United States. A family moves to Alaska. The father has extreme PTSD. And it gets very bad in the winters in Alaska, because if you don't know, like, Alaska is far enough up in its latitude that summers are really bright and winters are really dark. You know, it doesn't have that normal kind of 12 hours on, 12 hours off sort of cadence. And it's about this mother and daughter dealing with that domestic situation, but also this daughter learning how to live in Alaska and make friends. And I was just immersed in following their story. It was, like I said, it was just really hard at times, but also it had a lot of hope. So a lot of people like Kristen Hanna. I think a lot of people like the World War II one the best. This is just the one I've read. I read it for book club, and I really liked it. And I don't remember when I read it, but it was at a time where, like, I remember being like, oh, I can't wait to get home and read this book, which, like, I always love that feeling. All right, this one I put on the list, and yes, people put it on sci-fi fantasy lists, but, like, when I read this, I used my literary fiction brain. And this is how you lose the time war. There's a lot of going with itness for this, because this is like your classic, wait, is that real? Like, that's a type of literary fiction trope that's, like, not my favorite. When an author, you're reading something, it's pretty grounded, and then suddenly a character does something that they couldn't do if it was the real world. I'm like, wait, is that a thing that actually happened? Is it just a metaphor? Why is that sentence there? I am so jarred. And that type of feeling, I think, can happen in this, even though it's about two time travel agents fighting a time war. Like, you already have that outlandish premise, but, like, letters are being left in the rings of tree trunks. Like, there's even for sci-fi fantasy, it's imagery and it's, like, plausibility spectrum is wild. So that's why I kind of used my literary fiction brain more with it, but it was touching. I read it in a sitting. I had emotions. I'm glad it's gotten more acclaim, even if it was from a weird tweet. But I guess I'm putting this here also because if you are someone who's like, I actually really don't like speculative fiction that much, I think this uses a lot of devices we see more in literary fiction than we do in speculative fiction. So if you want to see if it might have a style that works for you, it's definitely experimental, which is also why I kind of put it over here. Similarly, Her Body and Other Parties probably could be considered horror. I don't know. And when I make a horror list, if I make a horror list, maybe I'll put it there again. I freaking love this book, so I just want to talk about it. Like, it's a short story collection by Carmen Maria Machado, and it's a short story collection about a relationship of someone who is a woman and her body in different facets and ways. It's, like, internal, it's external, it's haunting, it's joyful, it's all these things. There's a fever dream story in here called, like, the Law and Order SVU story. I have read this twice. I'm obsessed with it. And it definitely uses those literary fiction tropes of, like, wait, is this real? I can't tell. Because, again, even in the scope of if this is a horror, like, sometimes it's like, yeah, that makes sense. In a horror, this could happen. But sometimes the stories don't feel horror leaning, and you're like, wait, is this actually happening? I can't tell. What did that sentence mean? And it's okay that that happens. It's just that, like, that's why I think of it more as literary, because that's the part of my brain that's activated when I read literary fiction. Oh, this is probably the newest one on my list coming up, and that's Demon Copperhead. This won the Pulitzer and the Booker? No, it didn't win the Booker, but it won the Pulitzer for sure. It won another book award, but I don't remember which one last year. Regardless, I love it. It's apparently a retelling of David Copperfield, and someone in my comments once was like, it's just a retelling, and I'm like, yes, and I read the Wikipedia page, and it did take a lot of liberties, like there's no opioid crisis in David Copperfield. Also, I read Dickens. I don't like Dickens' writing style. Therefore, I know I liked this better because the authors had a writing style that I liked. And it's okay if you like Dickens. I just don't like Dickens. And maybe we can blame it on English departments thinking that a 9th grader should read Great Expectations, because they shouldn't. I'm sorry, I don't care if I'm in honors English. That book is long and it is boring, and I'm not relating to the themes when I'm 14. I'm just not. Tale of Two Cities, marginally better, but I was also a year older. But that one was marginally better. Anyways, I like Demon Copperhead as another basic bitch answer. I feel like everyone's been liking Demon Copperhead. Very heavy topics. So, like, for me, I always get nervous about drug addiction and parental abandonment and things like that, but this one worked pretty well for me. Girl, Woman, Other. Oh, this was my highlight from last year. Gosh, I love this book. Also, my foot's falling asleep, so I'm just gonna adjust that real quick. I sit on the floor, like I think I'm young, and like I'm not old, but wonder what I'll do in 10 years. This is not sustainable. So Girl, Woman, Other is amazing. This is also kind of like a short story vignette story, because I love a short story vignette story. And all these, it's kind of, they are interconnected stories, but not obviously. Like just a character you see in one, you might see in another, but they're not like a main character or anything. Just enough that you know this is all in the same world. And yeah, there are girls, they're non-binary and trans, like that's the other. And specifically what I thought was very eye-opening was that this is about people of marginalized identity in the United Kingdom, which isn't something I get to read a lot about. So that was interesting, seeing the overlap in experienced people in the United States who have minority identities, and then also the things that are slightly different. I just also loved the writing style. I think I read this in a really stressful week in my life, and I just couldn't put it down. It was a really wonderful escape. I think about it a lot. It's made me hate the Testaments more, which I didn't know was possible. Because if you don't know, this book had to share the Booker with the Testaments, which is not a good book, at least, especially comparatively. But yeah, it was joyful. I loved that. All right, here's another basic. I don't know if it's basic. I feel like this is the only Isabel Allende I've read. I definitely need to read more because I really liked this. And this is definitely not people's favorite Isabel Allende, but it's the one I've read and I really liked it, and that's A Long Petal of the Sea. It takes place mid to late 20th century in Chile. And, you know, I feel like people only think one, like, Holocaust type thing happened in the 20th century. And then I learned reading this, like, oh no, we've just been having concentration camps for, like, the entirety of the 20th century, just in different locations. And it sucks. Like, oh my God, humanity needs to get a grip. And I had actually read this, I believe, did I read it before or after reading Open Veins of Latin America? Regardless, one informed the other or vice versa, because a big part of this is that Chile is changing its government. They're voting for a socialist president. If you don't know, Cold War era, the United States is not big on liking that, but also it's not just because of the government change, it's more the lack of power to get the resources that they want. In South America in the 20th century in particular, we care a lot about their copper and some other rare minerals that are used for tech. So we could advance our tech like we did in the 20th century by taking their resources, and can't do that as easily if it's not like a pro-US capitalistic government. So that's like a part of a thing that happens in the story. And I just really liked it. I enjoyed my time reading it. It flowed really well. The fact that it was a translation and flowed so well, like I need to read more of her works. It's on my list. I was very excited by how much I liked that story. All right, The Mountains Sing. This is a Vietnamese historical fiction, and it's beautiful. I cannot remember if this is another translation, but it was a stunning story of, I believe, just the 20th century in Vietnam, which if you know any history, you know there's definitely the Vietnam War that happens near the end, but there's other things that happen. And I think actually it's also after the Vietnamese War. I just remember really loving it. I need to read it again. When I read this one, I wasn't able to use my eyeballs, which I love reading audiobooks. We know the part of your brain that's activated by audiobook reading is the same that is activated by physically reading with your eyes. I think for me, sometimes I can be more focused with a physical read. So sometimes I think my memories are better if I physically read. That said, at the time for book club, I couldn't. I still loved it. And actually, I don't know if it was the author or someone else who narrated it, but I really loved listening to it because there are a lot of Vietnamese names and words that I could not have pronounced. So that was a really lovely touch to the immersive experience. But it's beautiful. It's got that good blend of tragedy and hope that I kind of like to toe the line between with historical fiction and literary fiction. So, highly recommend. This one's weird, but I really liked it. And that's Migrations. This one has I don't know. I don't have a lot of unhinged female character books. I think that's what is that? Sad girl lit fic? That's at least a part of that. It's definitely a trope in there. This is my closest. We have a very unreliable narrator who is very gung-ho on this one task. It is a post-apocalyptic kind of lit fic book where birds are dying out, but we're following this one last bird migration on this ship. Audiobook has a lot of different narrators for the different cast, which is kind of nice because the cast is from all over the globe. So if you want that diversity of accents, and your brain, like mine, does not do that very well, the audiobook was great for that. It definitely has some of those, is this happening? We have such an unreliable narrator. What's going on? Like, she's a little weird. And it does do the flashbacks and present day. So you get to learn why she is the way she is and why she's doing what she's doing, which I really appreciated. Hamnet. This one I didn't know if I would like. I struggled with the first chapter of this, but then I was in it. This is a story about if Shakespeare had a son, which I mean, it's so convoluted. This story is about Hamnet, Shakespeare's son. And one of the stories is that when Shakespeare lost his son, that's why he wrote Hamlet. And so this is about the loss of that son. And I believe there was a boy named Hamnet who was a son of William Shakespeare of Strathavon. Again, I don't know a lot about this. And it's loosely based off that moment. So it's not like really inspired by true events, because like we don't have a lot of amazing records, but it's the idea of processing grief. And Shakespeare is really not the main character of this book at all. It's actually more Agatha or Agnes, however you want to call her. And her way of handling grief, and also about the loss of the son and how plague affects everyone. It worked for me. It really did. Like I said, it took me a minute because that first part was rough. Not just in writing style. It wasn't rough because I was following the plague, although like it's always like whenever you watch like a plague story, it's always like, oh no, don't touch that thing. It's just traveling. Oh, that cat's a bad cat because it's got the flea that's got the thing. So, I mean, if that really stresses you out, it's only for like a chapter. Most of it is just processing the fallout of grief and also seeing how this family formed. So, like, we have the two timelines, Shakespeare and Agnes meeting, and then processing the loss of the son. And if you are looking for something that is more Shakespeare perspective, he is not a main character. He's actually, using a classic lit fit trope, unnamed. He is never named as Shakespeare. It's just understood. He is always called like the carpenter's son or the writer or something. He's always called by his occupation. So, yeah, I liked that one. Ooh, here's another fun, weird one. Interior Chinatown. This is a fever dream story. If you're okay being in like a fever dream lit fic, ooh, the plausibility spectrum is bonkers in this one. You are basically in a script for this TV show, and it's a commentary of the roles that people who are Asian are allowed to play, and like they kind of live on set. Like, don't try to understand it, just like flow with it. That's my recommendation here. Go with it. It reminds me of that short story I really liked in Carmen Maria Machado's Her Body and Other Parties, where it's just like, what is happening? I don't understand, but like I kind of get the picture, like I kind of see it. I kind of like that sometimes. That type of art can be very fun for me. So yeah, I read it in a day because it's like pretty easy to read because it is just like a script. And it's fun commentary. I mean, it's not fun because like the commentary is kind of what you expect in terms of like typecasting minorities in TV shows, but still it had a satirical tone that I did find humorous. All right, we have 5 more. We got On Earth, We're Briefly Gorgeous, which for me was probably my first lit fic written by like a millennial author. Like this story is about a man who is queer and is coming out to his mom. Not really, like he's writing a letter to his mom. And his mom can't even speak English, so like this is like a cathartic process. And I do believe a lot of this is pseudo-autobiographical for the author. I'm not willing to commit to saying this is completely autobiographical because I cannot remember. But the author is also gay and also has an interesting relationship with his mom. So this character is writing to his mother about his life, about things that he never told her, such as being gay, such as things that he did for work. Because they had like a stressed relationship. It was one of those relationships where he loved her, but there were things missing. There were expectations he could not meet. And the reason why I say this is like the first millennial author I've read is like, he grew up in the 90s. And the way that he brings that forth, 90s in New England, like it felt really authentic. It's beautiful prose. It's going to be very poetic at times. Like sometimes the scenes are very clear. You know exactly where you are in a setting. You know who he's talking to. Everything makes sense. And then sometimes as he's writing this letter, he gets very meandering and poetic, talks about butterflies and stuff like that. So it worked for me more than it didn't work for me. And I think this one's on the list more out of a stronger appreciation than complete love and connection. The Dutch House. I like The Dutch House. I don't know why. Probably because Tom Hanks narrated it. This is the only Anne Patchett I've read. And again, I think this one, it kind of falls more into like, maybe it's not a horror. Like this is not a horror. But it reminds me of why I like haunted houses books in horror is like, I love interrogating a sense of space and a place and how that affects you. as a character. And that definitely happens with the Dutch house. So I really like that, and the history of the Dutch house and the people who live in it. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. It had a good ensemble cast too. And like I said, I mean, Tom Hanks. Like, that was a really fun time listening to that book. All right, The Nickel Boys. Less fun, more depressing. This is the only Colson Whitehead I've read so far. I do need to read Underground Railroad. I'm not sure about Harlem Shuffle. Ryan didn't like that one as much. But this one, if you don't know, is based heavily on true stories of these schools that young black boys were sent to. And, you know, this is a boy who was sent to one as part of the Nickel Boys, and the abuse he kind of goes through. It's really heavy. It's just rough. Again, it does have a good amount of, I don't want to even say hope, but it's not just so depressing that you can't see the light. Like, that's not the point of it. But yeah, it really interrogates a part of our history in the United States that honestly, until recently, a lot of people didn't know about, which is really, I mean, myself included, I guess. I would say I didn't know about it, but I was 0% surprised, if that makes sense. Because, yeah. All right, next one is The Memory Police, which again, technically, could you think of it as like dystopian science fiction? Sure, but I think if you read it with that genre lens, you're not going to have fun. Because it has more of those literary fiction tropes of, wait, is that real? How does this work? Does it work? And you have to learn this story's realm of possibilities and go with it. It has two stories. Our main story of our character who lives on this island where things are periodically forgotten. And when they're forgotten, they're not just forgotten, they are removed. Like, if the society forgets birds, there are no more birds. They can forget limbs, they can forget objects, they can forget concepts. It's very odd. And it's not necessarily about the forgetting and why are they forgetting. It's about the effects of forgetting. The adaptability of people, the survival methods of people, what we do to try and find a new normal. But the ripple in this is that there are people who don't forget. So what happens to those people? While everyone else is forgetting and these concepts are being removed, we have people who remember. And our main character, she's not one of those people, which is, I think, kind of a fun twist on a dystopian anyways, because a lot of times, usually in a dystopian, it's the person who sees the cracks. And this one, she doesn't see the cracks, but there are people around her who have, like her mother had, and then her editor, because she is an author. And so you see what she tries to do to help this person that she knows is close to her, even though she doesn't understand why he remembers things that she can't. And then also she has this book that she is writing. And this book she is writing does have a lot of overlap with the situation in the novel, but is also its own thing, but it kind of warps through time. And yeah, I've read this a few times for many book clubs. I've discussed it with several people. It is one of the best discussion reads I've ever had. So if you want a discussion read, especially, like, this book was written in the 90s and only translated recently. Ignore the 1984 comps. It doesn't feel like 1984 at all. Don't listen to that. I mean, I guess it doesn't no, it doesn't feel like 1984. 1984 has this, like, thriller tension that does not exist in The Memory Police. But in terms of, like, we recently as a society have really gone through a lot of changes and new normals, and I think that theme really resonates when you read this book. And the last one, by far not my favorite on the list, but also the reason why I started a Goodreads account, believe it or not, and that's My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry. This is usually not anyone's favorite Bachman, from what I can tell. I've only read two. I've read this one and A Man Called Ove. I've discussed at length in my Discord, and I discussed it when I read Man Called Ove, why that one rubs me the wrong way a tiny bit. Like, I get why people like it. And I don't think it's a bad work. I just think it handles subject matters that I think should be handled with a little bit more thought, a little bit with too much levity. But this one, My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry, I thought was amazing. We have this young girl whose best friend is her grandma, and her grandmother dies. So that's the start of the book. The grandmother's dead. But you get flashbacks to the relationship with this girl and the grandma. So, like, although it's weird, it's at the start of the book, the grandmother's dead to the girl. But to us as the reader, we're just starting to meet her. And you'll meet her through flashbacks this whole story. And it's so touching how this grandmother kind of set up this quest adventure to help this kid handle her grief, but also to help those in the community she's left behind, because she's kind of one of those linchpin personalities. I read this book 8 years ago, And I remember reading it and going, oh my God, so there can be fantasy in literary fiction? Because there were these beautiful, like, fairy tale stories with this young girl that her grandmother told her, and the metaphors and allegories between the things in the stories and people in her real life. I could see this being like an animated story or young action story for kids. I thought it was just really good. Like, it was really solid. And when I finished it, I wanted to see other reviews, and that's when I learned about Goodreads, and that's when I started tracking my reading. So I guess maybe it makes sense that's the end of this list, who knows. But there's proof that I enjoy and like books that are not genre fiction and pulpy, although I do think pulpy books are just as important as literary fiction. They all do different things. Art's just meant to make you respond to it. It's meant to make you emotional. It's meant to make you connect with themes. And I'm never going to tell you which art you should be consuming. Just try not to look down on people who consume art different from you. That's the only thing I would request, because goodness, life is too short for that. It's just art. Like, just, have a good time with it. Try not to support people who really go against your beliefs when you can, and move on, right? Let me know some of your favorite non-genre books, and like, based off this list, what would you recommend that I read? Because I'm actually still always trying to figure out what I want to read next in this space, because now that I no longer have this book club I used to go to, it's a little harder to get those on my radar than when I was forced to once a month. I have to find a good balance there. And if you just want to leave an emoji to let me know you're here, leave a dog emoji, because my grandmother asked me to tell you she's sorry. There's a very cute dog. And otherwise, like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.